Tonight on Cross Currents, Burma's Forgotten War, the story of a bitter struggle for independence in eastern Burma. The Karan people are fighting for a dream. It's been a long fight, but a fight they have no chance of winning. Cross Currents with Jim Carney.
Tonight's story is about a war that you've probably never heard of. It's a tiny war, a pathetic war. It's been going on for more than 40 years and could go on for another 50, consuming lives and money, crippling and maiming, and as in all wars, leaving one with the question, why? This is a war between the Karan people of eastern Burma and the Burmese central government. The Karan want to separate and be independent. They have virtually no hope of achieving their dream. And yet a combination of past glories, opportunistic politicians, and outside interests encourage them to keep fighting. But it's an important story for several reasons. First, it's a vivid example of the kind of ethnic conflict and turmoil that has plagued Burma for decades and continues to cripple her social, economic, and political development. Second, it's a poignant example of the legacy of colonialism. And thirdly, of the link between these endemic local wars and the drug trade which finances them. This dream of the Karan people had its beginning more than 100 years ago. During the early and middle 19th century, the British, who had by then been in India for about 150 years, gradually took over the immensely productive rice-producing areas of coastal and central Burma, where the dominant ethnic groups were the Burman and Mons peoples. Burma became a jewel in the British colonial crown. She was one of the world's most important producers and exporters of rice. She had 3/4 of the world's teak reserves. She exported tin, antimony, jade, and precious stones, and until World War II, oil. During that period, at the height of the British Empire, her capital, Rangoon, ranked with Singapore, Hong Kong, and Shanghai as one of the pearls of the East. But in Burma, the British made two fundamental mistakes. In most of their other colonies, such as Malaya, India, Ceylon, Kenya, the British had always, as a matter of policy, trained and employed local people in government jobs, thereby creating a class of competent and knowledgeable civil servants and administrators who were also, in general, loyal to their British employers. In Burma, which the British saw as simply an extension of India, in fact, Britain annexed Burma to India in 1886, the British brought in thousands of Indians, already trained and English-speaking, thus excluding the local Burmese. This, of course, alienated the Burmese, who found themselves third-class citizens in their own country. The second mistake, largely due to Burma's topography, was that the dozens of minority groups who lived in Burma's vast mountain regions were completely excluded from the economic and political life of what the British called Burma proper, the rice-growing regions. These two factors in part account for some of Burma's post-war behavior. For instance, her dislike of foreigners, particularly Indians and Europeans, her political isolationism, her economic radicalism, and the continuing ethnic and factional fighting that goes on in Burma today. But back then, the Karan people had an advantage. Living in eastern Burma towards the borders with China and Siam, they had been exposed to Christian missionaries. Many Karan became Christian and spoke English. Consequently, there was a natural affinity between the Karan and the British, and the Karan became one of the few Burmese minority groups to benefit from the British presence, primarily as soldiers with the British-led Burmese armed forces. Prior to and during World War II, many Burmese were sympathetic to the Japanese because they promised independence from the British. In 1941-42, a number of Burmese nationalists secretly went to Japan for military training and returned in 1943 with the invading Japanese. One of the Japanese-trained Burmese nationalists was Aung San, who won an overwhelming majority in Burma's first national elections in 1947. But he was assassinated before he could take office. The Karan, however, fought alongside the British against the Japanese, and Karan troops were with the British when Rangoon was recaptured in 1945. After the war, when Britain agreed to independence for Burma, the most difficult issue was reconciling the desires of the minority groups with those of the Burman majority. When on February the 12th, 1947, it was announced that the minority groups had agreed to become part of a unified Burma, the Karan felt betrayed and boycotted the elections in April 1947, won by the pro-Japanese Aung San. All of these factors have created bitter enmity between the Karan and Burma's central government. And so we have yet another long smoldering war in a remote corner of Asia, involving a people who are the product of a past that somehow took them off course, then cast them adrift, leaving them now struggling for an independence that grows ever more distant.
Morning Parade, Manipur, Burma.
Move! Yodeswa! Go!
General Bomia, who served under the British as a private in the Indian Army, is now Commander-in-Chief of the Karen National Liberation Army. The Karen people is one of 8 ethnic minorities fighting for autonomy from the socialist government of Burma. Journalists are forbidden to cover Burma's unknown but bitter civil war from inside the country. So the makers of this film were taken across the border from Thailand into Karen-held territory without Burmese government permission to film the war from the rebel point of view. The Karen, traditional enemies of the Burmese, prospered under the British Empire. Soon after independence, they broke away from Burma and declared their own independent Karen nation called Korthule. General Bomia is president of Korthule, a state unrecognized by any nation. He justifies the 40-year Karen insurgency by claiming that the Karen still living in Burma are oppressed and persecuted. With its own flag, Korthule is a state unmarked on any atlas. Arguing that they are treated as second-class citizens in Burma, the Karen have for 40 years run a self-contained country in what was a distant outpost of the British Empire. Their economy is based on teak, much of it planted in colonial days. The Karen Health Service provides free medical care throughout Korthule. Schools are run by the Ministry of Education.
The mouse ran up the claw. The claw stretched wide. The mouse ran down. Hickory down.
40 years after the end of the British Raj, English is still taught in Karen schools.
Do not decline. Get out of glue. THIS this. THIS this. This. IS is. AROS is rose. This is a rose.
BBC World Service presents Radio Newsreel.
Many of the older Karen served under the British. Major Aaron remembers the British time with affection. According to the Karen, colonial rule ended centuries of persecution by the Burmese.
Before the independence, the Karen and the British are going very well, you see. And they've been treated by the British very well. So there's no problem, nothing. Well, we should say against the British.
The Salween River, scene of bitter fighting in the British retreat from Burma. Headed upriver, a patrol runs the gauntlet of possible ambush by the Burmese army, dug in on the riverbanks. During the Second World War, over 10,000 Karen enlisted to fight for the empire against the Japanese invaders. In this remote corner of Southeast Asia, it's almost as though the war had never ended.
On the air road to Mandalay, new kinds of flying fishes play. And any thunder that disturbs the local inhabitants is not the dawn coming up, but bombs going down on Japs.
The Japanese were supported by the Burma Independence Army, who collaborated to hasten the end of British rule in Burma. The Karen remained loyal to the empire. They served at the defense of Imphal, the turning point of the Burma campaign. Viscount Slim, commander of the 14th Army, said, "The Karen are no fair-weather friends." Major Aaron was severely wounded fighting in the Papuan Hills with an undercover sabotage unit. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for gallantry, trying to save the lives of 2 British officers. He remembers the night he parachuted in behind enemy lines as if it were yesterday.
After we landed, we made contact with Major Seagrim. Seagrim was left behind before when the British withdrew from Burma. He was left behind in the Karen Hills to organize the Karen to do underground walks and all sorts of things, see, against the Japanese.
Major Seagrim is a legendary figure among the Karen, known as Grandfather Longlegs. This tall British officer organized the Karen resistance. He was executed after giving himself up in a vain attempt to stop Japanese reprisals against Karen civilians. The Karen also paid heavily for their loyalty to the British. Villages were destroyed and civilians executed.
Well, the Karen, they suffered very much during the Japanese regime, you see, for fighting with the British. They were tortured by the Japanese for fighting with the British.
After 4 years of fighting, the Japanese were driven out of Burma. Just a few months before the end of the war, the Burmese had turned on their Japanese allies, and when independence came, it was the Burmese who were given control of Karen lands. Today, 40 years on, Britain's wartime friends are still fighting for their independence in the trenches and jungles of eastern Burma. Many Karen feel they were betrayed by their former British comrades.
Lawa de Burma Valley. Away, away, he let us lead a kid. Whoever about
1948. As the Union Jack came down in Rangoon and the post-war Labour government gave Burma its independence, the loyalty of the Karen was put aside. The Karen say that with the British gone, they were regarded as lackeys of imperialism and were soon the victims of repression and discrimination. In 1949, after a massacre of Karen civilians, the disbanded veterans of the Second World War took up arms again to fight against the Burmese. Major Aaron gave up the British disability pension he'd collected in Rangoon and trekked to the jungle to join the Karen Revolution.
When I joined the revolution, I dare not go back there and draw my pension anymore. If I go back, I would be arrested and will be charged for treason or insurgency. So since that time until now, my pension has stopped.
The British colony of Burma had brought together a number of different peoples with no common culture. During the empire, the British used the Karen to help subjugate the Burmese population. After independence, the Burmese turned on the Karen, who they felt had collaborated with British colonial oppression. In 1949, when the Karen began their insurgency, they controlled a quarter of the country and threatened the capital, Rangoon. But over the last 40 years, they have been forced back into the remote hills of eastern Burma, along the border with Thailand, where they face a struggle for survival. The Karen troops are heavily outnumbered, but they use their knowledge of the jungle to outmaneuver the Burmese forces. In the rainy season, their elephant patrols carry them deep behind Burmese lines. In the thick jungle, the elephant cavalry, the elite unit of the Karen army, is of more use than any modern military equipment. The Karen struggle for independence is grounded in a belief that they are a people with culture and traditions distinct from the Burmese. The Karen, a Tibeto-Mongolian people, migrated from Central Asia over 12 centuries ago. In the more remote areas of Korthule, village life has changed little. No European had ever visited this village. Most of the hill Karen are animists. They believe that every tree, plant and animal has its own nat, or spirit. Their lives are a constant struggle not to offend the spirit world. Once a year, the headman summons benevolent spirits to participate in a ceremony designed to purge the soul of evil. Once an evil gnat has entered the body, sickness and even death may swiftly follow. In the tying of a thread around this girl child's wrist, the evil gnats are expelled and the child protected from sickness. In sharing a common cup of liquor, the other members of the village are protected in their turn. This way of life is now under threat from the approaching Burmese army. The isolation of these people is no protection. To the Burmese, every hill Karen is a possible rebel sympathizer. The Karen claim that villagers are forced to work for the Burmese army as guides or porters carrying supplies. They say that captured villagers are sometimes blown up after being used as human mine detectors. In a village less than 10 miles away, the Karen alleged that the Burmese took revenge on villagers for guerrilla activity. They maintain that the soldiers killed livestock, tortured and executed villagers, and then burnt down their huts. As a result of the approach of the Burmese army, many villages are being evacuated, and the Karen army is digging into defensive positions on a line of hills. If this position falls, the Burmese are within 2 days' march of Manipur, the capital of Korthule. The most striking evidence of the Burmese army's treatment of villagers is the exodus of Karen civilians across the border to refugee camps in Thailand. These people do not officially exist. Although more than 17,000 refugees have now fled to Thailand, the Thai government is unwilling to recognize them as refugees for fear of jeopardizing relations with the government of Burma. In their makeshift villages, the refugees rely for food on the domestic animals they manage to bring with them, and they are given limited supplies of rice by the Karen authorities. The refugees are frightened that at any moment the Thai authorities may send them back to face persecution from the Burmese army. Noor too fled to Thailand after her village had been destroyed by the Burmese. The Burmese army rounded up 4 young men from the village.
Le petit aba pour d'aller à matière de pané à mon parler qui de heki kula ge babala me le awete gane ki ko le to go gal pele asaka liki saka de paputa ti le mative setive de se gale te ti da wa se klone de plala wa kulo wa ki ko ti pa wa he pe de kuwe ki du nya de te wele kal ane ko la nya ti da ko la nya ne. After
several visits from Burmese patrols, Noor Po's village was burnt down.
Pony journey wada mana mana we the blonya ni mati machawe we blood or le you put do to gani jolly kati we ni the kulo ba ba
Many other refugees had similar stories to tell. Norm Wei too was shot through her pelvis by the Burmese army. Kia Tue fought for the British against the Japanese. He says he was beaten up and later went blind. These are not isolated instances. In several camps, eyewitnesses testified to alleged atrocities. Last week, Amnesty International published a report describing accounts of human rights violations in Burma as so numerous and similar that in its view they show a consistent pattern of gross violations of human rights in defiance of Burmese and international law. Over this border, Burma is closed to human rights observers. Burmese embassy officials in London declined to comment, except to draw attention to a letter sent to the United Nations, in which the Burmese government denied similar accusations. It said the alleged malpractices are prohibited by law as well as by custom in present-day Burma, whose tolerance and compassion are the hallmarks of its culture. Sunday service at Wanka refugee camp. The Christian pastors here were convinced that the stories of torture and mistreatment told by the refugees were true. Although most Karen are Buddhist or animist, many villages were converted by missionaries in the last century. For these Christian Karen, their faith is a source of comfort in a time of suffering. As well as spiritual comfort, the Baptist Church is one of few outside organizations supplying help to these refugees. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees cannot provide help unless invited by the Thai government. Many of the newest refugees have malaria, and even with treatment, 1 in every 5 patients dies from the disease. Lydia Tamlawa is a refugee coordinator for the Karen.
There at his village, the Burmese asked them to be a sanctuary for them. And while they are guarding the village, the Burmese came at the back, and while they are watching, the Burmese came at the back and boxed them and hit them. And he's very afraid of that. His family and his relatives, they're being suffered a lot by the Burmese. They are being boxed by the Burmese, hit by the Burmese. But when he saw that, he was very afraid of this, so he came, he dare not live anymore.
Although food is short in the camp, these patients are given some extra rations donated by the church to aid their recovery. For Norma T, the shock of leaving her home has left her with no milk for her baby.
clean it as her. Then it's in the clean away again and all, no? When the clean no, when it does her, no? It does her. When the clean, the away I'm just in the on what. Then you in the banana chicken canina, you know? The poor well. Or wait to gala. That way, Bamukudan. Chuki. Oh, Chuki, Mamma. I had to open all. I got to see, no? This girl, now she has a baby suffering from malaria. She has been here for 10 days already. She came from a village, from Limeway district, and the whole of her village is burned down by the Burmese. And she came running from that village, and now she got only one child, and the baby is very sick. So she has to come here, and the baby is so thin and so, very. And even she cannot cry, really. And she got her husband, but her husband now still try to find work, but they have to stay in the refugee camp because they have no work to do. So she said they are very poor, so she needs help. And the baby is so bad, she didn't got enough milk for the baby also.
Most of these people are victims of a Burmese army pacification program called the 4 Cuts, designed to cut off Karen supply lines, cut off civilian support, cut off border trade, and cut off the heads of rebels. Nor Mu's village was attacked in the 4 Cuts operation.
Hake apart tu mar min ba ke je kon ko wala je pa la we ha mu le pa to wa nan da je pa to wa de mi de pha mi te mi de ha mu le pa to wa de na la we ha ke mu le to wa ta na ji lo ko fu da wa wa ne ko fu da wa wa la ja je pa ne je pa de ko je pa ti le na da o da ko fu da ne to da te je mo ni da la nya di ba da wa ka ma ti ya lo ba te da di do da pi te da di ba da ka ma ti ya do a pho te da ra di ta lu ko pu ya de ma lo je ni ma lo je ni la de ye je mo na ho bya la a ho na ma ti na bu le ma ti na la pi ha mu pi de du mi ba pi ha mu ki lo mu chu tu bi bla bla le ki bla bla ta le ki ni wa de che na sa ka wa ke mu fa le ki te clip tu ba ni fa ha kho lu na ri na wa ko bi ti ga wa ko bi ti ga la cha wa ha mu na che wa ra pa te ku na ku dem na a ki la e u de na che wa ra ta phwe hu phwe na pa te ti ya te na pa te ta wa pho te la u ni de te le thum ti ga la wa pho te la u la de we de la te pa te le pi ya ka ni pho kha ko ta ro ma ra sa ma pi le ba yo te da ni te pi wa te pi chi mo ko ta ro ma pi le ba da de ma pi na ki pa de lo che ti ta we ju kho ni che ti ta we a kho ni thi ti ya wa da a chu na thi ti ya wa la de kla lo le mu kho ni kla lo ti we jan la de we de mu ni de te la wa pho ni wa da pe le kwa ni ya wa de le de ba a hu phe de na ko ho ko da khi na la a kla khi na chi ka la o de ma ti la da ti phe ne la ga de da
The Karen say that their suffering has strengthened their resolve, but the Burmese government maintain that support for the insurgency is now minimal. This is the Karen national anthem, which is taught to children inside Korthule and in the refugee camps in Thailand.
Say,
Many Karen live under Burmese rule, and the army command say that volunteers from communities scattered all over Burma risk their lives traveling by night through Burmese lines to the training camp at Manipur. But Amnesty International report that there have sometimes been forcible troop recruitment drives by the Karen. In 16 weeks, the recruits learn basic drill and guerrilla warfare. Recently, women have started to train for frontline duty, in spite of mixed feelings among some Karen. Many elders are concerned about the effect of the women's presence on the men. Because of the demands of the war, Karen soldiers are forbidden to marry until they are 35, and the military authorities try to keep these women soldiers apart from the men. This is a low-tech war. Using sabotage techniques learned from the British during the Second World War, the Karen make thousands of these homemade mines. They also allegedly bomb passenger trains and other civilian targets inside Burma. There's a shortage of modern small arms. Most are either captured or bought on the black market. Every rifle is needed at the front line, so many of the recruits have to train with wooden copies. After training, these soldiers cannot go to the front until a casualty frees a rifle. The size of the Karen army is disputed. The Burmese say there are less than 1,000, the Karen over 10,000. In fact, there seem to be about 4,000 men and women under arms. But even this small force ties down at least 3 divisions of the Burmese army, or nearly 30,000 men. Army HQ is the War Office in Manipur. Whilst some Karen units operate behind Burmese lines, many are tied down defending the frontiers of Korthule in trenches reminiscent of the First World War. At Morpo K, 101 Battalion is dug in around a 3-mile perimeter. The trenches, bearable in the dry season, become a sea of mud when the monsoon breaks. For over 4 years, there has been daily mortar and howitzer fire from the Burmese positions. In the interminable boredom of the trenches, the foot soldiers often shout to each other over no man's land, at places only 80 yards wide. The Burmese government accused the Karen of sustaining their war effort by producing and selling both opium and heroin. The Karen deny this. And to emphasize their disapproval of the drug trade, they invited the team to film the trial of Saw Moo Day, accused of smuggling heroin. The Karen Hill people do not traditionally grow opium, and there was no evidence of heroin production in Korthule. If the court finds Saw Moo Day guilty, he faces the death penalty. The Karen system of justice is modelled on that of the British Raj.
Aquame, Pano, the Kobaku, you can see your door down the law. Okay, Bakaralu, Burkwood, Kai. What was that? Burkwood, Kai, me.
For 2 days, the court heard how the heroin was smuggled from the Golden Triangle. The evidence was given at the speed of the clerk's typing. The prisoner was found guilty. Perhaps because of the team's presence, he was spared the firing squad and given 10 years hard labor. Convicts from all over Korthule are sent to Manipur to serve their sentences. The Karen are a strict and moralistic people, and sentences are harsh. Chained and manacled, the prisoners do hard labor. Offences range from corruption to murder, but by far the most common is premarital sex, for which there is a maximum 10-year sentence. Manipur is also the administrative capital of the independent Karen state. This is the Ministry of Finance.
This office is Finance and Revenue Department office. All of these are my staff.
In spite of its unassuming premises, the Ministry of Finance is the key to Korthule's continued existence. A major source of revenue is hardwood. Elephants clear the timber and drag it for miles to the nearest river. The elephant drivers nick their animals on their heads with picks to urge them on. There is no evidence of replanting. Once the reserves of teak in Korthule are exhausted, this source of income will be denied the Karen. Oddly, Korthule's other major source of revenue is provided by its enemy, the Burmese. The Karen charge a border toll at customs posts on consumer goods smuggled by Burmese coolies from Thailand through Korthule to the bazaars of Rangoon. Due to the stagnation of its state-controlled economy, there's a thriving black market in Burma for everything from bicycle spares to television sets. Traveling in the opposite direction are cows sold by Burmese farmers unwilling to accept low prices from government buyers. They prefer to smuggle their cattle out of Burma through Korthule to Thailand. The Karen charge a toll of £2 a cow. The Burmese Four Cuts policy and the latest Burmese offensive have severely reduced border traffic. Karen revenue is down by 40%. Without the money from the black market, they cannot sustain their war effort. At a meeting of the Karen Executive Council, ministers discussed the bleak outlook. Many believe it would be more realistic to reduce their demand for total independence and seek an autonomous state within Burma. However, the Burmese government shows no sign of wanting to negotiate. The last peace talks were in 1962. In this stalemate, General Bomia remains reluctant to abandon his dream of an independent Karen nation. At the moment, the chances of a political solution are remote. Since the departure of their British rulers and protectors, the plight of the Karen has slowly worsened. But they still hope that even now, 40 years after the end of the empire, the British will remember them. The Karen are keen to show that in spite of the gloomy outlook, their morale is high. At night on the parade ground at Manipur, a group of dancing girls entertains the troops. A commando unit had walked 12 miles from the front line for the show. From a dug-in mortar position on Hill 927 at Kormura, the 6th Karen Brigade fires on the Burmese. The 82nd Burmese Regiment is dug in on a ridge 1,000 meters away. The Karen have broken the Burmese military codes, which enable them to discover how successful the mortar attack has been.
Today we got the interception from the 82 Regiment's headquarters, contact with their frontline company about the shelling. And that is said the enemy, our troop, shelled 9 bombs to their camp.
In this bitter war, the Karen are notorious for seldom taking prisoners alive, but this soldier was lucky. Left behind by his Burmese comrades, he was captured and had his leg amputated in a Karen field hospital. Under interrogation, the prisoner revealed that the Burmese army was planning a major offensive against the Karen headquarters at Manipur. With a Burmese offensive imminent, the Karen gave orders for extra patrols to go out. But if the Burmese attack in force, there is little they can do. A mortar patrol was ordered to attack the Burmese ammunition dump at Meta War, which until last year was a Karen stronghold. Once the Karen lose a position, they seldom recapture it. Theirs is a slow rearguard action against overwhelming odds. There is a constant stream of casualties from fighting at the front. This is the field hospital at Manipur.
You pado ve you let a do that ke le khologe bi yo wadim khala bi yo khamata baya lole loki ba khlekhi chemo lo sapino la ne sapino la madaria le thomu ko tno la lo madia le tho du le ta lo to thiwa hi la ke se so mo let to lo bao mi qua co ya mi rai ye to ai te ni to lo ai ki lo ye no.
The Karen are a resilient people. They see their fight as a struggle for survival and believe the Burmese are intent on destroying Karen culture. The Karen believe that they have no choice but to carry on with their war against the Burmese if they are to continue as a people with a separate identity. As the Karen prepare to face another offensive from the Burmese army, they know that in the years to come, they will be hard-pressed to defend what now remains of Korthule.
There is little likelihood of the Karen rebellion being resolved in the near future. It has become a part of the fabric, a driving force in the Karen society. The government of Burma, on the other hand, sees any move towards independence by any minority group as a threat to the fragile unity of their country. Despite an ostensibly democratic structure, Burma is not a democracy. All candidates must be approved by the Burmese Socialist Party program, the BSPP, which exercises all legislative, executive, and judicial authority. The BSPP is controlled by the military and its longtime chief, General Ne Win. In 1988, following massive demonstrations and the deaths of several thousand civilians, General Ne Win relinquished his position as Prime Minister to General Sao Maung, but there's little doubt Ne Win still calls the shots. So the conflict continues. Amnesty International has repeatedly reported on what Amnesty calls the extrajudicial execution and torture of ethnic minorities in Burma. In Burma, there are many forgotten wars. Near Burma's northeastern border with Laos and Thailand lies the Golden Triangle, home of the Shan people and infamous as the source of most of the world's opium and its derivative, heroin. Next week on Cross Currents, Lord of the Golden Triangle. It's the story of Kun Sa, a powerful Shan warlord who is thought to control 60% of the world's heroin grown in the Golden Triangle. Kun Sa is convinced his purpose is a noble one. The vast profits from the production of opium finances Kun Sa's own private army, which is required to pursue the objective of an independent Shan state and to protect the Shan people from communist insurgents. Kun Sa's army also guarantees the transportation of the opium crop from Burma into Thailand, as well as offering one of the few regular sources of food and employment in that region. Lord of the Golden Triangle, next week on Cross Currents. And don't forget, if you'd like to know a little more about the background of this story and Burma, now known formally as the Union of Myanmar, do write or phone us for a viewer's guide for this program or any others in the Cross Currents series. Thanks for being with us. For Cross Currents, I'm Jim Carney. Good night.
Viewers' guides for each program in the Cross Currents series are available at a cost of $3 each or $25 for the full set of 10. You can obtain your guides by writing to The Knowledge Bookstore, Post Office Box 94,000, Richmond, BC, V6Y2A2. If you prefer, you can phone the bookstore at one of these numbers, 660-2190, or toll-free 1-800-663-9711. And you can charge the order to your Visa or MasterCard. Once again, the cost of these informative guides is $3 each or $25 for the set of 10. Order yours now.